My name is Rachel Ellington, and just 37 days ago, I was seated in a sleek conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown Dallas skyscraper, preparing to sign the largest deal in Valorix Group's history. I had a pen in hand, 3 executives from Landmark AeroTech across the table, and years of trust and negotiation coming to a head with a $28 million contract. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Bradley Kingsley, the 27-year-old son of Valorix's CEO. He'd never closed a deal larger than a catered lunch order, and somehow he had just ended my career in a single sentence. Clear out your office tonight. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will handle your exit Monday morning. I sat frozen for a moment, the pen still poised above the signature line. My heart was hammering, but I managed to look up and say calmly, "Gentlemen, there's been a change in representation. I will no longer be overseeing this account." Confusion rippled across their faces, but I stood, gathered my documents, and walked out, already knowing exactly what I would do next. Before I go further, I want to ask you to take a moment. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And while you're here, please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon, because what happened next will change how you look at corporate power forever. See, what Bradley didn't know, what no one at Valorix knew, was why I was so successful at closing impossible deals. My colleagues thought I was just lucky or naturally persuasive. The truth was much simpler and far more explosive. My family owns Ellington Components, a 24-year-old precision manufacturing firm that specializes in custom-built parts, logistics coordination, and hard-to-source industrial services. When I joined Valorix 3 years ago, I quickly realized their profits were being eaten alive by bloated supply chain costs. They were overpaying for everything, simply because they lacked volume and leverage. So I made a decision I thought would help everyone. I quietly arranged for my family's company to supply Valorix at cost, or even at a loss, to make contracts more competitive. My parents and older sister thought I was nuts, but they agreed, believing in the long game and in me. Thanks to those arrangements, I could offer pricing that competitors couldn't touch. Every miraculous deal I landed, the $15 million Whitestone deal, the $12 million Pacificon contract, and yes, the $28 million Landmark deal, was made possible because Ellington Components was subsidizing the back end. I never told anyone at Valorix. I believed that eventually I'd be promoted into a role where I could formalize the partnership, perhaps even make Ellington Components an official vendor. But Bradley? He saw only my results, not my strategy. And when talk of my promotion to regional director reached him, he panicked. He used the only power he had, his last name, to fire me in the middle of my finest hour. What he didn't realize was that his message didn't just fire me, it opened the floodgates to his company's unraveling. And my next move would make sure of it. For 3 years, Ellington Components quietly subsidized Valorix Group's largest contracts, allowing me to present clients with pricing our competitors couldn't touch. Every major deal I closed, every so-called miracle in the sales department, was made possible because my family was absorbing the difference between market value and what Valorix actually paid for parts, labor, and logistics. The $28 million Landmark AeroTech deal? It only worked because Ellington Components agreed to supply specialized aerospace-grade parts at 30% below industry rate. The $15 million Whitestone Energy contract last year? We handled every aspect of logistics and custom fabrication at cost. And the $12 million Pacificon Systems partnership? Same story. I never told anyone at Valorix about these arrangements. To me, it wasn't deception. It was resourcefulness. I was leveraging my family's business to build something lasting. I assumed that when the time was right, I'd be promoted into a senior role and could formalize the relationship, maybe even bring Ellington Components on as an official strategic partner. I thought I was laying the groundwork for long-term success. But Bradley Kingsley, the CEO's entitled son, had been watching my success with increasing bitterness. He'd graduated from business school 2 years ago and thought that entitled him to a corner office and automatic respect. But he had to watch me, A woman with no Ivy League credentials and no corporate family name consistently outperformed him in every metric that mattered. He hated it. His father, to his credit, kept promoting me. I earned larger territories, more competitive commission tiers, and a seat at the table for high-stakes strategy sessions. Bradley, meanwhile, floundered. The final straw came when his father floated the idea of promoting me to regional director, a position Bradley had been eyeing since the day he arrived. That's when he pulled the only lever he had, his last name. And he waited until the worst possible moment, minutes before I was about to close the biggest deal in company history, to fire me by text. He thought he'd humiliated me. What he actually did was trigger his own professional collapse. The very next morning, I called my father. "Dad," I said, "remember all those special pricing agreements I arranged for Valorix? I need you to cancel them. All of them. Immediately. Go back to standard market rates." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then my father said, "Rachel, are you sure? That'll shake up a lot of existing contracts." I replied, "They fired me, by text, while I was closing a $28 million contract. I'm sure. If you want to know what happened after the audits and how one final discovery changed everything we thought we knew, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because the next chapter is where the real reckoning begins." Within 24 hours, every supplier Ellington Components had connected Valorix with received a call. Pricing structures were changing. My family hadn't just provided discounted services, they had also extended their supplier network, asking those vendors to offer reduced rates based on our reputation. And now, every one of those vendor relationships vanished overnight. Costs surged, margins evaporated. And that was just the beginning of the unraveling. All those relationships vanished overnight. Components that had once been provided at cost jumped back to full market rates. Specialized services, fabrication, quality inspections, and technical support that had been generously handled by my family's team now required premium pricing. Even logistics, once streamlined through trusted contacts, became expensive and slow. Valorix Group scrambled to deliver on the contracts I'd built under the old pricing structure, but the math no longer worked. Their actual costs were suddenly 40% higher than projected. What should have been a $6 million gain from the Landmark AeroTech contract flipped into a $3 million loss. And that was just the beginning. 18 other active deals unraveled just as quickly. The Whitestone Energy contract? Unprofitable. The Pacificon Systems deal? A loss leader overnight. Every contract I had built was dependent on the invisible scaffolding of Ellington Components' pricing and relationships. Once that disappeared, so did Valorix's margins. Now, they had a choice: honor the contracts and hemorrhage millions, or breach them and risk lawsuits. Neither path looked good. Bradley Kingsley, the one who had fired me, was suddenly in over his head. He spent 2 weeks in panic mode, calling suppliers, vendors, logistics firms, trying to understand why everything had changed. But no one gave him a clear answer. Most simply said, "Our pricing structure has been updated," or "Our capacity is now committed elsewhere." Nothing made sense to him until one vendor casually mentioned Ellington Components. Bradley had never heard the name before, but when he looked us up, he found a reputable family-owned business with deep industry relationships and a sterling track record. That's when he made the call, to my father. According to my dad, the conversation was brief. Bradley demanded to know why Ellington Components had pulled back from their relationship with Valorix and why partner suppliers had followed suit. My father simply replied, "Our arrangements were with Rachel Ellington. She no longer works for your company, so our arrangements no longer exist." And that's when it hit him, that all those years of luck, of me outperforming the rest of his department, hadn't been luck at all. It was strategy, sacrifice, family, and smart, quiet support from people who believed in me more than his father ever did. But Bradley had only just begun to feel the consequences. While he was busy trying to fix a supply chain he didn't understand, I was already 2 steps ahead. I launched Ellington Advisory, a boutique consulting firm focused on strategic vendor partnerships and contract recovery. After 3 years inside Valorix, I knew exactly which clients were unhappy, which contracts were vulnerable, and which relationships had been held together by nothing more than inertia and patchwork solutions. And I knew one more thing. Ellington Components now had available capacity. Resources that had once gone to keeping Valorix afloat could now serve new clients. Clients willing to pay fair rates for world-class service. I wasn't just ending a chapter. I was rewriting the entire playbook. My first call was to Landmark AeroTech. I calmly explained that there had been a change in my employment situation and that I was now working independently as the founder of Ellington Advisory. I let them know I had direct access to advanced manufacturing resources that could handle their project faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than Valorix Group ever could. I offered them the same deliverables, but this time with full transparency, fair pricing, and a guarantee of priority access to the very vendors that had once powered their projects in silence. They signed with me that same afternoon. $28 million moved from Valorix's pipeline into mine with a single phone call. My second call was to Whitestone Energy. I gave them the same offer, only this time, I didn't have to sell it as hard. They'd already noticed the change in service quality and pricing since I left. Within a few hours, they agreed to terminate their contract with Valorix and move their $15 million account to Ellington Advisory. By the end of the first week, I had shifted nearly $43 million in business away from my former employer, and I was just getting started. Over the next 6 months, I built long-term relationships with over 24 companies I had originally helped bring to Valorix. Many of them were already frustrated, dealing with price hikes, delivery delays, and vague answers from reps who didn't understand what had made the deals work in the first place. I showed them exactly where the problems were and gave them a simple path forward. Within 3 weeks, Valorix Group had lost $67 million in active contracts. Their supply chain costs had skyrocketed. Their profit margins disappeared. Bradley Kingsley, who thought he'd eliminated his biggest rival with one impulsive message, was now watching the company unravel in real time. And then came the final move. Valorix's primary bank called in their credit line. The financials were a disaster, and the firm needed a cash infusion just to make payroll. Bradley's father started calling every investor he could think of, hoping someone would rescue the sinking ship. But no one was interested in a company with no clients, no pricing power, and no supply chain leverage. That's when I made my offer. Ellington Advisory, backed by my family's manufacturing resources and a $67 million contract portfolio, offered to acquire all remaining assets of Valorix Group for $1. The deal included their downtown office lease, their remaining client accounts, their equipment, and their entire staff. Well, almost everyone. The one person I didn't retain? Bradley Kingsley. On his first day reporting to me, I handed him his termination letter in person. "Bradley," I said calmly, "there's been a change in your employment status. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out in 30 minutes. The stunned look on his face was worth every bit of effort, but the story wasn't over. Because when I opened Valorix's internal records, I uncovered something that made the entire revenge arc feel like just the beginning. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for what I found. Hit that notification bell, because what I uncovered next took this story from corporate betrayal to full-blown scandal. The text message that ended my career at Valorix Group didn't just lead to revenge. It unearthed something far darker than one spoiled heir with an ego problem. 3 days after Bradley Kingsley packed up his desk, I sat alone in what used to be his father's corner office. The view was stunning, Dallas skyline glowing under a late afternoon haze, but I barely noticed. I had 5 years' worth of financial records spread across the desk, files I now legally owned after acquiring Valorix for $1. At first, I expected to find incompetence, maybe some bad deals, inflated expenses, or legacy contracts that didn't make sense. But what I discovered made my stomach twist. It wasn't just bad management. It was embezzlement, hundreds of thousands of dollars per quarter, buried under layers of forged vendor payments, bloated service contracts, and consulting fees for services never rendered. It was so precise, so intentional, that it would have been invisible to anyone not comparing contracts with actual delivery logs. And that's exactly what I was doing. As I examined the numbers, a horrifying realization hit me. My family's subsidized pricing had been the perfect camouflage. Every time Ellington Components delivered parts and services below market rate, someone was pocketing the difference as if Valorix had paid full price. We had unknowingly been covering for a sophisticated financial crime. For the next 12 hours, I mapped the pattern. I cross-referenced bank records with vendor logs, scrutinized signatures on service agreements, matched fake invoices with non-existent delivery dates. By 2 a.m., the truth was undeniable. Someone on the inside had administrative access, and they'd been skimming funds on every large deal I'd ever closed. Even more disturbing, the theft had intensified over the past year, right around the time Bradley started hovering around my accounts. At first, I thought he was just jealous or insecure. But now I wondered, was he trying to uncover something? That's when I stumbled onto a hidden folder buried deep in Valorix's cloud server, an archive of emails Bradley had been sending over the past 6 months. They were addressed to someone named Dr. Patricia Hollins, a forensic accountant with a reputation for exposing corporate fraud. The emails weren't panicked, but they were urgent, detailed, filled with spreadsheets, transaction questions, and patterns he couldn't explain. He hadn't gone through official channels. He'd paid her out of pocket, likely to keep his suspicions private until he had something concrete. I called Dr. Hollins the next morning. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, everything I thought I knew about my firing, my success, and even Bradley Kingsley had changed. Because as it turned out, Bradley hadn't fired me out of petty resentment. He'd fired me because he thought I was the one stealing. According to Dr. Hollins, Bradley Kingsley had reached out to her privately 6 months before everything fell apart. He had grown increasingly suspicious about the financials at Valorix Group. On paper, the company was reporting record sales, thanks in large part to the multi-million-dollar contracts I had closed. But the profit margins kept shrinking. It didn't add up. He noticed discrepancies in vendor payments that didn't align with the services actually provided. He couldn't make sense of why our most successful deals weren't generating the returns they should have. That's when he began to suspect the worst. And the worst, in his eyes, was me. From Bradley's perspective, I was the common denominator. I negotiated the largest contracts. I coordinated vendor relationships. I handled the most valuable client communications. I had full visibility into both revenue streams and cost structures. He thought I was skimming funds, manipulating contracts, and diverting the missing money through hidden charges or kickbacks. Dr. Hollins told me that Bradley genuinely believed he was protecting his father's company, that the text message firing wasn't fueled by entitlement or ego, it was a preemptive strike. He thought he finally had enough circumstantial evidence to sever my access before I could cover my tracks. His plan had been simple: fire me, then spend the weekend reviewing my accounts with Dr. Hollins and present a full case to the authorities on Monday morning. What he hadn't anticipated, what none of us had, was that I would dismantle the company before the weekend ended, that my family would pull our support, that $67 million in contracts would walk out the door with me, and that Valorix's house of cards would collapse before he could discover the truth. Dr. Hollins, to her credit, kept digging. After the acquisition, I gave her full access to the financial records. No restrictions, no conditions. I told her I wanted to know everything, no matter where the evidence pointed. And she found the real thief. Janet Moreau, Valorix Group's chief financial officer, had been stealing from the company for over 4 years. Quietly, systematically. She had created an intricate web of fake vendor accounts, ghost service contracts, and inflated bills that funneled roughly $40,000 a month into untraceable accounts. She was methodical, never enough to trigger automatic alerts, just enough to bleed the company slowly. And my family's generous pricing? It had covered up the damage perfectly. Every time Ellington Components saved the company money, Janet used that margin gap to insert phantom costs that no one questioned. After all, the math looked fine on the surface. Profit was thin, but explainable. until I cut off the subsidy. When we returned all services to market rates, the real cost of business emerged, and with it, Janet's theft. Suddenly, what had looked like slightly unprofitable deals turned into red ink disasters. Her fake charges were no longer masked by hidden savings. The collapse wasn't just fast, it was inevitable. Because once the truth was visible, everything unraveled. Dr. Hollins had tracked Janet Moreau's embezzlement across 5 years of financial records. In total, Janet had stolen more than $800,000 from Valorix Group, and she wasn't done. She'd recently opened several new fake vendor accounts, drafted contracts for phantom consulting services, and begun siphoning funds from smaller, less monitored accounts that had previously been too risky to touch. Her scheme was expanding fast, likely under the assumption that no one was watching. But this is where my so-called revenge took an unexpected and oddly satisfying turn. When Valorix collapsed, and I announced the acquisition through Ellington Advisory, Janet panicked. She knew a bankruptcy or acquisition meant audits, real ones. And she knew that the financial trail she'd hidden for half a decade was about to see daylight. So she tried to disappear. The day after I finalized the deal, Janet submitted her resignation, citing personal growth opportunities. She requested expedited processing of her final paycheck, unused vacation payout, and full release of retirement contributions. Her plan was to cash out and vanish before I gained full control of the records. What she didn't realize was that Dr. Hollins had already flagged her as the top suspect and had been monitoring her behavior for weeks. The moment Janet tried to move funds, Dr. Hollins was ready. She had screenshots, transaction logs, fake vendor documentation, and a mapped-out financial trail with timestamps and invoice IDs. Every move Janet made was recorded and backed by proof. More importantly, Janet had no idea that I now legally owned Valorix Group, including the right to pursue both civil and criminal charges for anything committed against the company. When she submitted falsified expense reports and payments to phony vendors in her resignation paperwork, she wasn't just stealing from a crumbling company, she was stealing from me. I had 3 choices. 1. Let her walk away with what she'd already taken. 2. Sue her in civil court and hope to recover some portion over years of litigation. 3. Press criminal charges and go through a lengthy legal battle. I chose none of the above. I invented a 4th path. I called Janet and invited her to a knowledge transfer meeting to discuss the CFO transition. I told her I admired her ability to maintain operational stability through the acquisition and wanted to understand her systems before she left. She accepted immediately. I scheduled the meeting for the following Friday, in the same conference room where Bradley had once fired me via text. Janet arrived precisely on time, professional as ever, carrying a sleek leather briefcase full of spreadsheets and procedural documentation. For 30 minutes, she explained invoice workflows, payment schedules, vendor processes, all of it wrapped in jargon meant to confuse. What she didn't know was that Dr. Hollins was in the adjacent room, recording every word, video, audio, the works. Every vendor Janet named was a company she had created. Every invoice system she described was a mechanism of fraud. And when she finished, I asked her one simple question. "Janet," I said, keeping my tone calm, "can you help me understand why Northbridge Consulting has been billing us for strategic planning services when there's no evidence of any actual deliverables?" Her face drained of color. Northbridge Consulting was one of Janet's shell companies. She had registered it 2 years earlier and had been quietly billing Valorix Group for monthly strategy work that never happened. Just that one fake vendor had funneled over $120,000 into her personal accounts. She blinked fast. I think that might have been an inherited vendor," she stammered. "Possibly from previous management. I'd have to check the transition records." Then she said something I'll never forget. "Rachel, I believe there may have been some irregularities in prior financial oversight. I've been concerned about certain patterns myself, and I was planning to review everything with you after the full transition." She was trying to pin the blame on Bradley's father, the previous CEO, to cover her own crimes. She cast herself as the loyal protector, someone just trying to clean up a mess without causing panic. That's when I calmly explained that, "Doctor Hollins had been investigating the company's financials for the past 6 months, and that we had documented every fraudulent transaction Janet had processed since 2021. I also told her the meeting had been recorded in full. Her vendor onboarding process? That was a step-by-step confession. Every detail she just offered was a thread in a tangled web of fraud, and we had the whole thing on video. Janet stood up, trying to exit, but Dr. Hollins walked in with a thick binder under one arm and a folder of printed documents in the other. It included bank statements, IRS-registered business records for Northbridge Consulting, and time-stamped wire transfers. Janet didn't argue after that. We gave her the same 2 choices the authorities would offer her later: cooperate fully and begin restitution, or face felony embezzlement charges and the possibility of federal prison. She chose cooperation. Over the next week, Janet turned over her full playbook: accounting spreadsheets, bank access, copies of false invoices, and lists of every account she'd siphoned money from. She returned over $200,000 from hidden savings and retirement accounts. She testified in detail about how her scheme worked and the structural weaknesses that let it happen. But the moment that truly stayed with me was the call to Bradley Kingsley. We explained everything: how he had been wrong about me, but right about the deeper issue. Janet had been the cancer inside the company all along. He listened in silence for a long time. Then I heard him crying, not from shame, but from relief. He'd spent months watching the numbers break down, suspecting someone close to the center was sabotaging the company, and believing, wrongly, that it had been me. His firing of me had been a tragic mistake, but his instincts had been dead on. I offered him his job back, not out of pity, but because people who care enough to investigate, even when it hurts, are the kind I want around. Bradley declined, graciously. He said he planned to complete his fraud investigation training with Dr. Hollins and launch a consultancy to help other small businesses spot financial crimes before it's too late. Bradley's decision to step away and pursue a new path wasn't just admirable, it was necessary. He told me he wanted to dedicate his career to helping small and mid-sized businesses detect financial crimes before they became devastating. He didn't want any other family to go through what his had endured. That kind of mission, born out of both guilt and growth, left me with deep respect for him. In the months that followed, Valorix Group underwent a transformation I never could have predicted. What once felt like a battlefield became a blueprint for redemption. Under Ellington Advisory's leadership, we cleaned house, rebuilt internal controls, and finally formalized Ellington Components as an official partner. No longer a hidden subsidy, but a proudly acknowledged backbone of the business. We restructured contracts, restored client trust, and even began winning back companies that had walked away during the collapse. Our new leadership culture emphasized transparency, ethics, and communication. And yes, Janet Moreau, the former CFO who had nearly bled the company dry, was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. But the true end of this story didn't come with court rulings or press releases. It came with a text message. Exactly 60 days after Bradley fired me, I sent him a note. Bradley, thank you for caring enough about your father's company to investigate when something felt wrong. You were right about the crime. You just had the wrong suspect. I hope you'll consider coming back when you're ready. We could use someone who pays attention. He replied 30 seconds later. Rachel, thank you for teaching me that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. But sometimes, they lead to the same place. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, wrongly accused, or cut out of something you built with your own 2 hands, then I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Share your story. Not just for me, but for the thousands of others who are reading and watching and realizing they're not alone. Because we all carry quiet battles. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is speak them out loud. When Bradley fired me, I could have folded. I could have walked away, angry and bitter, telling myself that life wasn't fair. But instead, I chose clarity over chaos, strategy over spite, and most importantly, I chose truth over vengeance. That's a lesson I hope you carry with you. Because in this world, especially in work and leadership, Not everything broken needs to be burned down. Some things need to be exposed, understood, and rebuilt the right way. So here's my advice. Trust your instincts, especially when the facts don't seem to line up. Pay attention to the numbers. Look beneath the surface. And don't let someone else's opinion define your worth. If something feels wrong, ask. If someone tries to shut you out, build your own door. And if you ever find yourself standing on the edge of revenge, ask yourself what kind of justice truly serves you and those around you. Finally, if you believe stories like mine matter, stories of women reclaiming power, of truth winning out, of quiet professionals changing the game, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss a chapter. Your support helps these stories rise, and it tells the world we are paying attention. Thank you for listening, and thank you for standing with me.